My name is Whitney Walsh, and I am 32 years old. Exactly 3 days ago, I woke up from a routine surgical procedure in a sterile hospital recovery room, reached for my personal cell phone with trembling, anesthetic-numbed fingers, and discovered 14 missed calls. My 5-year-old daughter, Sophie, and my 7-year-old son, Oliver, were sitting completely alone on a neighbor's front porch down the street. My biological parents, the exact two people I had trusted with my children's lives, had abandoned them on that porch and driven away over 2 hours earlier. Still wearing a thin hospital gown, still feeling the dull ache of surgical incisions on my right side, and still tasting the bitter, metallic tang of general anesthesia at the back of my throat, I called my mother directly from my recovery bed. She picked up the phone on the third ring, her voice bright, cheerful, and light-hearted, as though nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. What she uttered next during that brief phone call was the absolute last thing she would ever say to me as a human being who possessed access to my children. By 9 o'clock that very night, I had personally changed every single lock on my home, updated every emergency contact form in my children's school system, and completely rewritten every single line of my legal will. To understand how a mother reaches the point of absolute, unyielding severance, I have to take you back to 6:45 on Tuesday morning, the morning I dropped my children off at my parents' house and drove myself to Ridgeview Community Hospital. For 8 years, I have served as a dedicated pediatric nurse at Ridgeview. I work the floor 3 days a week on 12-hour shifts, and I routinely pick up extra overtime whenever the patient census is high. My husband, Marcus, is a physical therapist, possessing steady hands, a calm voice, and the specific kind of grounded demeanor that can de-escalate a screaming, terrified toddler while resetting a dislocated shoulder in the exact same afternoon. Marcus happened to be out of state in Denver that week for an advanced continuing education conference he had booked 3 full months in advance. We have 2 vibrant children. Oliver is 7 years old, and Sophie is 5. In my extended family dynamic, I have always been the default person everyone calls whenever they require a labor-intensive favor, but nobody ever calls whenever they have good news to share. Need someone to watch a dog for the weekend? Call Whitney. Need an early morning ride to a cardiologist appointment across town at 7 in the morning? Call Whitney. Need someone to organize the family reunion, rent the hall, print the name tags, and bring 3 homemade desserts? Whitney has it handled. But when Oliver scored the winning goal in his very first youth soccer game, my mother discovered the news 3 weeks later, from a photo I posted online. I learned very early in my childhood that asking my parents for emotional support was the fastest way to feel completely invisible. So I stopped asking. I scheduled everything, I managed my own life, and I handled every crisis independently. And somewhere along the way, my family reached the unspoken conclusion that I was a person who simply didn't require anything from anyone. Last Tuesday was supposed to alter nothing in our daily routine. It was scheduled as a straightforward, routine day surgery, 4 hours in and out of the hospital. I had meticulously prearranged every single detail, the preoperative blood work, my official time off from the hospital, and the children's overnight bags. All I required from my parents was 4 modest hours of their day. 4 hours. That was the exact metric of time my children's safety was worth to them. My gallbladder had been causing severe medical issues for 6 months, sharp, agonizing pain after meals and persistent nausea that made demanding 12-hour night shifts nearly unbearable. My surgeon scheduled the laparoscopic cholecystectomy 2 weeks prior to Marcus's Denver conference, and Marcus and I both agreed the timing made perfect logistical sense. It was a minimally invasive procedure, under general anesthesia, 2 hours on the operating table, 2 hours in post-op recovery, and home by dinner time. Marcus offered to cancel his Denver conference to stay home, but I explicitly told him no. I assured him that my parents would watch the kids and that everything would be fine. That specific phrase, "it's fine," has served as the silent, self-sacrificing operating system of my entire life. I had called my mother on a Thursday evening to finalize the arrangement. "Mom, I have to undergo gallbladder surgery next Tuesday morning," I explained. "Can you and Dad watch Oliver and Sophie from 7 in the morning until about noon?" My mother, Diane Walsh, does not offer a favor the way normal, loving people do. She grants a favor, as if she is bestowing an extraordinary royal concession. "Of course, sweetheart," she cooed over the line. "Bring them over at 6:30. Your father and I will make them fresh pancakes. Do not worry about a single thing." I meticulously packed individual overnight bags for the kids, a fresh change of clothes, toothbrushes, Oliver's school reading book, and Sophie's favorite stuffed cotton rabbit. I typed up a detailed note outlining their schedules: a morning snack at 10, lunch at noon, and a short nap for Sophie if she grew cranky. I listed their allergies, emergency contacts, and copies of their insurance cards, placing everything neatly into a thick manila folder on my kitchen table. Nurses are organized by nature and professional training. We label things, we cross-check details, and we establish strict order, because it is the only way to keep human beings alive when a crisis hits. I did not realize it at the time, but that simple manila folder would soon become the most critical piece of legal evidence in my entire house. On Tuesday morning at 6:45 a.m., I pulled into my parents' gravel driveway, the house I grew up in, a sage green colonial on Birch Lane featuring a decorative garden flag by the mailbox. My father opened the front door in his plaid bathrobe. Ray Walsh, 61 years old, is a retired postal worker. He has never once raised his voice in my presence, and he has never once stood up for me either, maintaining both traits with absolute, infuriating consistency. "Morning, Whit," he muttered, taking Oliver's backpack. Oliver dragged his feet going inside, looking as if he were being marched into a courtroom. My mother was standing in the kitchen, a mug of coffee on the counter and a skillet warming on the stove. She offered me a careful hug, knowing I had been guarding my painful right side for weeks, and took the manila folder from my hand. "Don't worry about a single thing, Whitney," she assured me smoothly. "We have got everything completely under control." I knelt down on the entryway rug, where 5-year-old Sophie was clinging tightly to my sweatpants. I gently peeled her small fingers away one by one, kissing the crown of her head. "Mommy will be back before dinner, sweetie," I whispered. "Grandma is going to make you pancakes." Sophie stared at me with her large brown eyes, staying completely silent, just holding onto my sleeve. At that moment, my mother's cell phone buzzed loudly against the granite countertop. She glanced down at the screen, saw a text message, and immediately flipped the phone face down. "Who is that texting so early?" I asked, not out of suspicion, but merely making casual conversation. "Oh, just your sister, Amber," my mother replied offhandedly. "Something about her hairstylist." My younger sister, Amber, perpetually maintained a high-stakes crisis, a last-minute nail emergency, a sudden gallery opening, or a friend's birthday brunch that required 3 distinct outfit changes. I didn't think twice about the text message. Looking back with total clarity, I should have noticed that my mother flipped that phone face down a little too quickly, a little too carefully. The drive from Birch Lane to Ridgeview Community Hospital takes precisely 20 minutes. I know every pothole, every traffic light, and every commercial shortcut along that route, having driven it 1,000 times in my medical scrubs. But that morning, I was wearing sweatpants and a zip-up hoodie, checking in as a surgical patient at the front desk instead of scanning my employee badge at the staff entrance. Pre-op was a brightly lit room separated by thin privacy curtains. A veteran nurse named Dina, whom I knew from the third-floor pediatric unit, started my 4-line, hitting the vein flawlessly on the first attempt. I texted Marcus, "Heading into pre-op now. Kids are safe with Mom and Dad. Love you." 3 dots appeared, followed by his reply, "Love you, babe. Call me the second you wake up." Tell your mom I said thanks. I set my phone face up on the metal bedside table, leaving the volume on maximum. The anesthesiologist walked in, a calm, professional young man, who explained the propofol administration, as if I hadn't seen it administered 100 times. I lay back on the gurney, staring up at the ceiling tiles, counting 4 small water stains in the corner. The fall fluid felt icy cold as it entered my vein. My final thought before the propofol swept me into darkness was simple and comforting: my children are safe. They are with my parents. 4 hours later, I would discover precisely what my parents' promise was worth. I returned to consciousness in disjointed fragments. First came the sensory ambient sounds, the rhythmic, high-pitched beeping of a cardiac monitor, a patient coughing behind a curtain, and the squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum. Then came the harsh light, overhead fluorescence drilling straight through my heavy eyelids. Finally came the deep throb of physical pain, a heavy, localized ache beneath my ribs on my right side. The digital clock on the wall read 2:47 p.m. I slowly turned my head toward the side table. My phone screen was dark, but when I awkwardly tapped the glass with heavy fingers, the screen illuminated with a terrifying display: 14 missed calls, all originating from the exact same telephone number. It was Margaret Doyle, my 67-year-old neighbor, who lives in the grey ranch house next door to my home. Mrs. Doyle is a retired third-grade teacher, with 2 cats and a pristine garden, who has watched my children play in the yard every summer since Oliver learned to walk. A woman like Margaret Doyle does not call a person 14 consecutive times unless a catastrophic emergency has occurred. There were 3 voicemails and 6 text messages waiting. I opened the text messages first, my hands shaking so violently that the phone nearly slipped from my grasp. The first text, sent at 12:18 p.m., read: Whitney, honey, your children are at my house right now. Your parents drove away and left them. Call me the moment you see this. The second text, sent at 12:34 p.m., read: Whitney, please call me immediately. Oliver is extremely upset. The third text, sent at 1:15 p.m., read: I am getting deeply worried. The kids are safe with me, but please call. I don't know what is happening. The recovery room felt as though it spun on its axis. I pressed the call button, and Mrs. Doyle picked up before the very first ring finished. Oh, thank God. Her voice came through, tight, strained, but controlled. Margaret Doyle spent 30 years managing classrooms of 8-year-olds. She does not panic easily, but the deep strain in her voice was undeniable. Mrs. Doyle, what happened? I demanded, gasping as my surgical incision pulled sharply. Whitney, listen to me carefully, Mrs. Doyle explained softly. Your parents drove away from your house around 11:30 this morning. I was outside trimming my hedge along the driveway, and saw your father's car pull out into the street. I assumed they were running a quick errand, but when I looked over at your front porch 10 minutes later, I saw Oliver and Sophie sitting on the porch steps completely alone. Sophie was crying hysterically. I gripped the cell phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. I ran straight across the lawn, Mrs. Doyle continued. Oliver had his little arm wrapped around Sophie, trying to comfort her. He told me that his grandfather had told them to sit on the porch, and that they would be back in an hour. Whitney, that was over 3 hours ago. They left a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old completely unattended on a porch in the heat. 3 hours. My 5-year-old daughter and my 7-year-old son, abandoned on a wooden porch for 3 hours before my neighbor discovered them. Are they okay, Margaret? I sobbed, tears spilling down my cheeks. They are fine, sweetheart. They are sitting at my kitchen table right now. Oliver made Sophie a peanut butter sandwich himself. That sweet boy is taking care of his little sister. A 7-year-old child was forced to make lunch for his crying 5-year-old sister because the adults assigned to protect them had walked away. Thank you, Mrs. Doyle, I choked out. I mean that with my whole heart. I know you do, honey. Are you all right? You sound terrible. I just woke up from abdominal surgery, I confessed. An absolute, horrified silence fell over the line. Oh, Whitney. Mrs. Doyle whispered in profound sorrow. You take all the time you need. Your babies are completely safe with me. I hung up the phone, closed my eyes, and immediately dialed my mother's number. Diane Walsh picked up on the third ring, her voice light, breezy, and entirely unbothered, using the exact cheerful tone she deploys whenever she is pretending nothing wrong has occurred. Hi, sweetheart. How did the little procedure go? Where are my children, Mom? I asked, my voice dropping into a razor-sharp, icy register. A brief, calculated pause echoed over the line. It was the familiar, manipulative pause I had heard my entire life, the sound of my mother calculating her defense. Oh? I see Mrs. Doyle called you, she said smoothly. Where are my children? I demanded again. Whitney, please calm down and stop being dramatic. My mother snapped, her tone instantly shifting into defensive irritation. Your sister Amber had a sudden, emergency situation. She had a last-minute cancellation open up with her master hairstylist, and you know how utterly impossible it is to secure an appointment with Ricardo. Those high-end slots fill up in minutes. I sat frozen in my hospital bed, unable to process the sheer absurdity of her words. The children were fast asleep taking a nap when your father and I left. My mother continued rapidly, attempting to rewrite reality. Your father checked on them before we pulled out, they were not napping. I screamed into the receiver, uncaring that recovery room nurses were staring at me. They were sitting on the front porch. Sophie was sobbing. You left my 5-year-old and 7-year-old completely alone. Another pause followed, shorter this time, as she recalibrated her manipulation. Well? Mrs. Doyle was right next door, wasn't she? She's a perfectly responsible woman. Why are you making such a massive scene over this? Why did you walk out on my children? I demanded, my voice shaking with absolute rage. And that was the exact moment she uttered the 7 words that would sever our relationship forever. 7 words that would sit in my chest like jagged shrapnel for the rest of my life. Your sister needed us so much more. She abandoned my children during my surgery so my adult sister could get her hair styled. I sat in absolute, dead silence for 8 seconds, watching the steady rhythm of the heart monitor beside my bed. Then, I spoke in a quiet, cold, unbreakable voice. Do not ever step foot on my property again. Do not ever attempt to contact my children again. And before she could utter another word, I hung up the phone. I laid back against the thin hospital pillow and ran the quiet, agonizing arithmetic of my life. The physical pain in my abdomen was a dull, localized ache, but the emotional fracture inside my chest felt wide and deep. When I was 10 years old, I had spent 3 weeks building a working baking soda volcano for the regional science fair, ultimately winning a blue ribbon. My parents had missed the exhibition because Amber had a minor dance recital across town, with my mother promising we would celebrate my achievement the following year. There was never a next year, and I had quietly stopped entering competitions. When I was 16, I earned a partial academic scholarship to a state university, taking on a part-time job at a local pharmacy to cover the tuition gap. My mother's lukewarm response was a brief, distracted congratulations before launching into a glowing monologue about Amber being accepted into a summer arts program that required 3 brand new suitcases. When I graduated with my nursing degree at 22, my parents arrived 40 minutes late to the ceremony because Amber had developed a sudden migraine, leaving me to walk across the stage toward 2 empty wooden chairs. When I married Marcus at 26, my mother complained continuously about the summer heat at our modest backyard gathering and departed 2 hours early to drive Amber to a gallery opening in the city, handing me a generic card that read "Proud of you always" with 0 financial gift inside. Marcus had silently kept score on my behalf for years, because he recognized that I had long since surrendered the expectation of ever being prioritized. But seeing that same systemic neglect touch my innocent children was the catalyst that finally destroyed every lingering shred of my compliance. The hospital discharged me shortly after 5 o'clock that afternoon with strict medical instructions prohibiting any heavy lifting and requiring complete rest. Disregarding the discharge nurse's warnings about driving after general anesthesia, I slowly drove my own car home, pulling into my driveway at 5:28 p.m. Mrs. Doyle was already waiting near her porch, carefully walking Oliver and Sophie across the green lawn toward my driveway. Sophie broke away the moment she spotted my car, sprinting across the grass and slamming her little body against my knees. I gasped out loud as the sudden impact pulled sharply against my internal stitches, but I refused to let go, wrapping my arms tightly around her small frame. Oliver walked over with a serious, guarded expression that no 7-year-old boy should ever have to carry. He looked into my eyes and whispered, "Mommy, are you okay?" I held Sophie's hand the whole time we were on the porch. Kneeling down on the cold concrete despite the searing pain in my right side, I pulled both of my children into a fierce, protective embrace, whispering over and over that they were safe and that Oliver had been an extraordinary big brother. Mrs. Doyle stood at the edge of the driveway with her hands folded, offering a quiet, knowing nod that acknowledged the monumental boundary I was about to set. As I guided the kids toward the front door, Sophie tugged gently on my hoodie sleeve and looked up at me with large, confused eyes. "Mommy," she whispered softly, "Grandma told us that Aunt Amber needed her so much more than we did today." By 9 p.m., after feeding the children dinner and putting them to bed, I sat down at my kitchen table with a hot cup of tea and opened my laptop. My side throbbed rhythmically, but my mind was operating with razor-sharp, surgical clarity. I logged into my sister Amber's public social media account, scrolling down her timeline until my eyes locked onto a post uploaded at precisely 10:48 a.m. on Tuesday morning, 45 minutes before I was wheeled into the operating room. It was a high-resolution selfie of Amber sitting in a leather salon chair, with a black cape draped over her shoulders, her hairstylist posing behind her with a pair of shears. Her caption read, "Emergency glam session. Mom came through for me last minute like she always does. Blessed best mom ever." Beneath the image sat a comment left by my mother, Diane Walsh, featuring 3 red heart emojis and the words, "Anything for my golden girl." I scrolled down further to a second photograph uploaded at 1:30 p.m., displaying Amber and my mother sitting across from each other at an upscale sidewalk cafe, holding 2 iced lattes over a marble tabletop, while I was lying in a hospital recovery room and my children were sitting on a cold porch step. I immediately captured high-resolution screenshots of both posts, printed them on my home printer, and placed the physical paper inside the thick manila folder I had created for the kids' schedules. I then systematically initiated a comprehensive operational overhaul of my family's security and legal structures. First, I filled out an online emergency contact modification form for Ridgeview Elementary, permanently striking my parents' names from my children's authorized pickup and medical release records. Second, I contacted a local 24-hour locksmith service, scheduling an emergency service call for the following morning. Third, I drafted a detailed email to our family estate attorney, Sandra Klein, requesting an immediate formal addendum to our legal will, power of attorney, and medical healthcare directives to ensure that my parents would be permanently excluded from gaining legal custody or decision-making power over my children under any circumstances. Fourth, I logged into my primary life insurance portal, removing my mother as a contingent beneficiary and replacing her with Marcus's sister, Claire, who resided in Charlotte. I laid out a handwritten checklist on top of the manila folder. 1. Replace all home locks and deadbolts. 2. Formally revoke school pickup authorizations. 3. Execute legal will addendum. 4. Update life insurance beneficiaries. 5. Establish new emergency healthcare directives. Every single item represented a definitive physical, legal, and financial wall erected between my toxic biological family and my children. On Wednesday morning at 10 a.m., a professional locksmith arrived in a commercial van, systematically replacing the deadbolts on my front door, back door, and side garage entrance, while reprogramming the electronic keypad codes. He handed me 3 brand new, heavy brass keys that felt cold and solid in my palm. While he was working on the front door frame, my mother attempted to call my cell phone 6 consecutive times. I sat at the kitchen counter, watching the screen illuminate and vibrate against the wood, and I deliberately let every single call go straight to voicemail without answering. When the locksmith finished, I paid him in cash, kept 2 keys for Marcus and myself, and personally walked across the lawn to hand the 3rd key to Mrs. Doyle. She took the brass key, squeezed my hand tightly, and whispered, "You are doing the absolute right thing for your babies, Whitney." By Thursday morning, I drove to Ridgeview Elementary School to meet with the main office secretary, Mrs. Holt. I handed her the updated legal documentation, taking a black pen and drawing a thick, heavy line directly through the printed names of Diane Walsh and Ray Walsh on the official emergency contact card. Mrs. Holt examined the modified card, looked up over her reading glasses with deep professional understanding, and nodded slowly. "These records are updated in our master database as of right now, Mrs. Walsh," she assured me calmly. "No unauthorized individual will be permitted near your children." On Friday afternoon, I sat in the plush leather chair inside attorney Sandra Klein's office on Main Street. Sandra reviewed the manila folder, examined the screenshots of the salon posts, and listened quietly as I detailed the events of Tuesday morning. Without a single word of hesitation, she drafted the necessary legal codicils, stripping my parents of all secondary guardianship nominations, healthcare proxy status, and estate execution rights, transferring those legal responsibilities directly to Marcus's sister. I signed my name 6 times on the designated signature lines beneath the gold notary seal. In less than 45 minutes, I had permanently legally unwritten my biological parents from my family's future. My mother's voicemails evolved dramatically over those 3 days. Her first voicemail on Wednesday was light, casual, and dismissive. "Hi, sweetheart. Just checking in to see how your recovery is going. Give me a quick call back when you get a second." Her second voicemail on Thursday morning carried an edge of rising irritation. "Whitney, I have called you 4 times now and you haven't responded. This silent treatment is getting completely ridiculous. Call me back immediately." Her third voicemail on Friday afternoon was filled with sharp, weaponized anger. "I don't know what kind of childish game you think you are playing, Whitney, but I am your mother. You are being completely unreasonable over a simple misunderstanding." On Saturday morning, my father sent a brief, 6-word text message, "Your mother is hysterical. Call her." A few hours later, my sister Amber sent a long, manipulative text message claiming that our mother had been crying all week, accusing me of creating unnecessary family drama, and insisting that leaving the kids for a few hours was merely an innocent mistake. I read every single message with complete emotional detachment. They were not remotely concerned about the physical safety or emotional trauma of my children, they were exclusively terrified of losing control over the public narrative. Marcus returned home from his Denver conference on Sunday afternoon at 2:15 p.m., dropping his travel bags in the hallway and walking straight into the kitchen. I slid the thick manila folder across the table toward him without speaking a word. He sat down, opened the cover, and meticulously reviewed every document inside: the modified school pickup authorization forms, the signed legal will codicils, the locksmith receipt, the insurance beneficiary confirmation, and finally, the printed screenshots of my sister's glam session at 1:30 p.m. Marcus stared at the photograph of my mother smiling over an iced latte, while our 7-year-old son was feeding his crying sister in a neighbor's kitchen, and his strong jaw clenched tightly. He slowly closed the folder, set it down on the table, looked me directly in the eyes, and uttered 4 simple words that validated every hard boundary I had set: "You did the right thing." He reached across the table, wrapped his warm hand over mine, and held it tightly as the heavy burden I had carried alone for 32 years finally began to lift from my shoulders. At 5:15 p.m. that Sunday evening, my mother's silver sedan turned into our driveway, followed closely by Amber's red hatchback. My mother was fully expecting to participate in our traditional Sunday family dinner, a routine she routinely utilized to gloss over her past misdeeds and force everyone back into compliance over a hot meal. Through the kitchen window, I watched my mother walk up the front porch steps carrying a covered glass baking dish filled with pot roast, while my father and sister trailed behind her. She reached out her hand, inserted her old house key into my front door lock, and attempted to turn the cylinder. The deadbolt didn't budge. She tried again, jiggling the brass handle aggressively, assuming the key was simply misaligned. When the lock remained completely frozen, she let out an annoyed huff and pressed the front doorbell. I picked up the thick manila folder from the side table, walked down the hallway, and opened the front door, standing straight in the doorway wearing a clean blouse and jeans. I didn't lean against the frame, I didn't show physical weakness from my surgery, and I offered no polite smile. "Whitney, what on earth is wrong with your front door lock?" my mother demanded, balancing the heavy baking dish in the crook of her arm. "My key wouldn't turn at all." "The key doesn't work, because I had every lock on this house professionally replaced on Wednesday morning, Mom," I stated in a calm, flat voice. My mother blinked in absolute shock, her arms dropping slightly as the glass dish tilted. "What do you mean you changed the locks?" she gasped, looking at my father in disbelief. "Can we please just come inside and sit down to talk about this?" "No," I replied firmly. "You are not coming into my home." "Whitney, stop being so utterly ridiculous." My sister Amber snapped from the porch steps, crossing her arms defensively. "Mom made a whole pot roast for dinner. Are you seriously going to stand there and lock your own family out over a tiny mistake?" I opened the manila folder, pulled out the first official document, and held it up directly in front of my mother's face. "This is a certified copy of the updated emergency contact and pickup authorization form from Ridgeview Elementary," I said clearly. "Your names have been permanently removed from the school system as of Thursday morning." My mother's face lost every drop of color as her eyes scanned the heavy black line drawn through her name. "Whitney, you can't do this," she whispered, her voice beginning to tremble. I pulled out the second document. "This is a signed, notarized codicil to our family will and healthcare directives. You have been legally stripped of all secondary guardianship nominations and medical proxy rights regarding Oliver and Sophie. If anything happens to Marcus or me, my children will go directly to Marcus's sister, Claire." "Marcus's sister?" my father blustered, stepping forward on the porch, his face flushing red. "She lives in North Carolina. You are giving legal custody of our grandchildren to a relative in another state." "I am giving custody to a family that actually values my children's lives," I corrected him cleanly. I pulled out the final printed paper from the folder, the high-resolution screenshot of Amber's social media post. I held the image directly in front of my mother's eyes, pointing to the digital timestamp in the corner. "You posted this photograph at 1:30 p.m. on Tuesday afternoon, while I was lying in a hospital recovery room, and my children were sitting abandoned on a neighbor's porch steps. You left a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old completely unattended so Amber could get her hair styled by Ricardo." My mother stared at the printed image of herself smiling over an iced latte, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, completely unable to form a coherent defense. We thought the kids were fast asleep taking a nap," she stammered frantically, her voice cracking. "Your father checked on them before we left." "They were not taking a nap, Mom," I shouted, my voice cutting through her lies like a razor. "They were sitting outside crying. Oliver had to make his little sister a sandwich because the grandparents, who promised to protect them, walked out the door to go to a hair salon." "Blood is blood, Whitney. My father bellowed, stepping up beside my mother, his voice booming across the lawn. You do not throw your own biological family away over a single misunderstanding. Family forgives. This wasn't a misunderstanding, Dad, I replied, looking him dead in the eyes with absolute, unwavering conviction. This was a 32-year pattern of neglect that finally reached my children. You sat at my sister's engagement party 2 years ago and told me that I was the strong one, who didn't need anything, while Amber was the one who needed everything. You used my strength as an excuse to abandon me my entire life, and on Tuesday morning, you used that same pathetic excuse to abandon my children. My sister Amber stepped up, her eyes flashing with pure rage. You are completely ruining this entire family over one single afternoon, Whitney. You have always been so bitter and jealous of me. I looked at Amber, the sister who had received the $30,000 country club engagement party, the designer clothes, the endless financial bailouts, and the immediate attention, and I felt zero envy. I felt only a profound, liberating pity. I am not jealous of you, Amber, I said softly. I am protecting my children from a toxic dynamic that teaches them that their safety is worth less than a salon appointment. You needed Mom for a haircut. I needed her for a major surgical procedure, and she chose you without a second thought. That was her final choice. Mrs. Doyle stepped out onto her neighboring porch down the street, standing quietly with her arms folded, watching the entire confrontation with firm support. My mother looked over at Mrs. Doyle, her face contorted in deep humiliation, realizing that her pristine public image, as a devoted grandmother, was shattering in full view of the neighborhood. She looked back at me, tears of pure anger and public embarrassment streaming down her cheeks, her hands shaking so violently that the glass baking dish rattled against her ring. If you close this door on us today, Whitney, my mother threatened, her voice dropping into a desperate, dangerous whisper, do not ever expect us to be there when you need help again. You will regret this for the rest of your life. I looked my mother straight in the eyes, holding the manila folder tight against my chest, and offered the single truest response of my life, Mom. I needed you on Tuesday morning while I was lying on an operating table, and you weren't there. I have been on my own my entire life, and I am finally comfortable with that reality. Without another word, I stepped back into my foyer, pulled the heavy wooden door shut, and turned the brand new deadbolt lock into place. The solid metal bolt clicked into the frame with a sharp, heavy, definitive snap. Through the thick wood, I heard my sister shouting, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps descending the porch steps. A moment later, 3 car doors slammed shut in the driveway, an engine revved aggressively, and the sound of tires crunching over the gravel faded away into the distance, as my biological family drove out of my life forever. I leaned my back against the locked door, closed my eyes, and took a long, deep, unrestricted breath of clean air. The heavy emotional weight that I had carried since I was a 10-year-old girl sitting alone at a science fair instantly evaporated from my spirit. Marcus walked down the hallway, wrapped his strong arms around my waist, and rested his chin gently on the top of my head, holding me securely against his chest. Oliver and Sophie walked out from the living room, holding their coloring books, completely unbothered by the quiet household. Oliver looked up at me with a soft smile and asked, "Mommy, is it time for dinner now?" I looked down at my sweet, safe children, wrapped my arms around Marcus, and smiled for the very first time in a week. "Yes, sweetie," I answered softly, leading my family into the warm kitchen. "It's time for dinner." In the months that followed, my parents attempted to send manipulative text messages through my father's phone, but I remained entirely unbothered, maintaining the absolute legal and physical boundaries I had established. I recovered fully from my surgery, returned to my rewarding work as a pediatric nurse, and poured all my love and energy into raising my children inside a home built on absolute security, radical honesty, and genuine devotion. I spent 32 years believing that I had to endure neglect and pretend that everything was fine just to maintain a seat at a family table, only to discover that the greatest victory of my life was building my own table. a table where my children will always be safe, cherished, and unconditionally loved.